Welcome everybody to our November 16th program of what we call Midday Music at Houston Tuesday Musical Club. We have these on 4 or 5 Tuesdays in the fall and then again in the spring. We're keeping our fingers crossed in the spring that we'll be back at Emerson Church, but that depends more on them than on us actually. So, but we'll still have programs wherever they'll be and that you can access them wherever you are. It's great to see guests here today. We always love to have guests, and with the entrance of Zoom, we had some more guests than normal. So that's a very exciting thing that we've been able to do, as well as have our speakers from all over the country. So if you are a guest and like what you see, we welcome you to come back and maybe even join our club to get more information about it. All that is on our website. I put the website in the chat box by the Zoom. Welcome to everybody. And now I'll turn the program back to Debbie and Gayle. We'll get started.
Well, it is my pleasure to introduce Judith Shatin. I've known Judith since we met at Aspen as young students a few years ago. And then I knew her at Juilliard. And she is the first composer that I ever got to work with. And it was very, very interesting for me to be a part of her process, because I realized that I could go to the source and say, well, how's that supposed to go? And what is that part supposed to mean? And, what if, and it was a little bit more flexible than I thought. And at the same time, more direct than I thought. Very exciting for me as a performer, and led me to all kinds of imagination of, like, what if I had known Chopin or Bach or any of those people. But Judith has had an incredible career. Her music has been played all over the world, and by big symphonies such as the National Symphony, wonderful ensembles such as the Kronos Quartet. She's had stuff done in Carnegie Hall. She's had performances here in Houston, and she has quite a few recordings of her work. And she is one of these people who, I'm going to let her speak about this, but she draws inspiration from things that you just wouldn't even think of. It's like one of her early pieces. She drew inspiration from nya 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 nya, and she wrote a wonderful piece using that as a theme. So anyway, it is my great pleasure to introduce Judith Shatin.
Thank you so very much for that lovely introduction. And before I start speaking about my own music, I have a little Gayle story to tell you, because Gayle has been the muse for my piano music ever since those early days. And I wrote my piano concerto, The Passion of Saint Cecilia, for Gayle. And I remember sending her some of the piece, and it was quite demanding and virtuosic. I will say that I never used virtuosity for its own sake, but it was called for in this instance. And I remember Gayle receiving the music, getting in touch, and asking me when the hard part was coming. So I always found that really amusing. I'm not going to be able to speak about that today, but if you're curious, it's on my CD and also on various streaming services. The CD is called Piping the Earth, and the piece is The Passion of Saint Cecilia. So as Gayle mentioned, I do take inspiration from perhaps an unusual wide variety of sources, ranging from sounds in the world around us, such as the zipper on one of my jackets, to things going on in the world, to traditions, literary, spiritual, political. In fact, another piece of mine that has just now been premiered and is available online this month is a piece called Respecting the First Amendment, commissioned by the San Jose Orchestra and scored for string orchestra and electronics based on readings of and about the First Amendment, ranging from the voices of John F. Kennedy to Barney Frank, to Gabby Gifford's reading the First Amendment on the floor of the House the day before she was so cruelly shot while trying to meet with her constituents. As far as music goes, I really love sources that range from the acoustic to the digital, and I'll speak a lot about that. But I'm going to start with acoustic pieces because for me, it's never been about choosing acoustic versus digital. It's been and. Why not enjoy the amazing expansion of the sonic world that technology affords? I have to say, when I first started doing music with new technologies, I was often accused of not doing, quote, real music, as though there is something about processing or creating sound using digital technologies that automatically removes it from the world of experience and emotion that music can so richly engender. I completely disagree with that. So when I was a small child and my father, Leo Shatin, was working with a group called the Musicians Emergency Fund, some of the pianists in that group encouraged him to purchase a piano because they heard he had daughters. Well, that might be a bit sexist, but for me as a 5-year-old, I was enthralled with this old upright piano. And eventually I was offered piano lessons. And I also had the good fortune at that time to be living in Albany, New York, which had a very active music program in the schools. So later I took up flute as well. I must say that one of my great sorrows is how few children today do have exposure to music in schools and how important I think that still remains. So starting from that point, I was able later to attend music theory classes that one of my other piano teachers offered while we were living at the time in New Jersey. And I found it just fascinating. I loved learning about the stuff of music and how you could put it together. And I didn't really do much composing then, just a few small pieces now and then. I didn't really become eager to make composing my life's work until I became an undergraduate at Douglas College and was able to study with Robert Maves at Rutgers University and came to understand and hear so much more music. And I just decided I wanted to do it. There was no one to tell me no. There wasn't exactly anyone to tell me yes either. So I remember that as a senior, I was supposed to perform a piano recital and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it at all. What I wanted to do was a concert of my compositions, such as they were at the time. And I managed to convince the chair of the department, who said, if you find the performers, arrange all the rehearsals, arrange everything, we will let you do it, provided that you perform one of your own pieces as well. So I did. And from that point on, I just made composition my focus. And after my studies at Juilliard and my PhD at Princeton, I moved to the University of Virginia, where I taught for nearly 40 years. And it was a wonderful, joyous voyage in so many ways. So why am I going to start with acoustic music? I'm going to start with acoustic music because it's still very important to me. And again, because it's never been either or. And I'm going to start with a couple of small excerpts from perhaps the most traditional form I have worked with, theme and variations, which of course has a storied history. I wrote this piece while I was doing a residency at Brahms' house in Baden-Baden with a huge picture of Brahms looking down on me, which I took to be a friendly ghost. I love his music, and he spent his summers there when Clara Schumann was close by in Baden-Baden. The piece I composed there is called Chai Variations on Eliyahu Hanavi. Now, I had first been taken with this melody when I was commissioned by the Kronos Quartet and composed a piece called Elijah's Chariot, which is scored for amplified string quartet and electronics made from recordings of a shofar, which I processed quite dramatically in many places. And I also used the theme for this beautiful folk song, Eliyahu Hanavi. That piece is recorded on my CD, Time to Burn, if you're curious. I don't have time for that one today, but I'd like to share with you a video excerpt from the Chai Variations on Eliyahu Hanavi in a performance by Nathan Carteret, who has also recorded it on his CD, Poets of the Piano, Acts of Faith, which ranges from Bach and Busoni to Glass and my own work. So let's now hear the theme and then two variations. And before we do, I will just say one other quick thing about it, which is that the variation order is chosen by the performer. I'd also like to mention, if you're curious, that that Nathan and I had a conversation about this piece, which is included in a YouTube video called Backstory, Conversation and Performance of Chai Variations on Eliyahu Hanavi. And it's really fascinating. Each performer of this piece chooses the variation order. And that leads to over 6 quadrillion possible choices. And it's been just fascinating to see and hear what those choices are. The next piece I'd like to share with you is also an acoustic one, and it is a setting of Psalm 23 in the original Hebrew. The song is called Adonai Ro'i, and I composed it in the aftermath of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. It also has been, of course, particularly apropos given the unfortunate toll of COVID, and you are going to hear it in a rendition of a virtual choir by the University of Virginia University Singers. Next, I'd like to share with you another acoustic excerpt. This is from a very different kind of piece to just share another type of inspiration. I was commissioned by the Library of Congress to compose a piece for violin and piano, and it was on a program that also was devoted to the music of Elliott Carter. And I knew Mr. Carter at Juilliard, and I was kind of trying to think of a way in which my music might reflect on aspects that were important to him. And one of the things that is very important to him is rhythmic design and structure. My music, of course, is radically different from his, but I was thinking about ancient Greece and different attitudes towards rhythm. And I came across a building called the Tower of the Eight Winds, the ruins of which still stand in Athens today. And it was a building that had not only a sundial, but also a water clock. And I was thinking about those and the rhythms that they suggested, and also the winds that are located, the images of winds that are located at the top of the building around the octagonal structure. And I decided to create a piece based on different types of winds. And one of them in the fourth movement is called the Willy Wah, and it is a wind that races down from the mountains to the sea. And I think you will hear this reflected in the rhythm and the shape of the piece in this recording by violinist Hasse Borup and pianist Mary Kathleen Ernst. And it is from a CD of the same name, Tower of the Eight Winds, which is all my violin and piano music, as well as a solo for piano and a solo for violin and electronics. So this one is Willy Wah. So I'm going to go ahead and at least start describing the kinds of sound that I use in my electronic composition and where they come from. And they come from some very surprising places. I'm going to be sharing with you, for instance, the sound of music that I created from the sound of a pickaxe when I was in a deep coal mine in West Virginia for a different project called Coal. And it was a folk oratorio scored for Appalachian ensemble, electronics, keyboard, and chorus. And working with Appalachian musicians was really a very fascinating process. So Debbie, I think if we can, let's skip ignoto numine and move ahead to the pickaxe transformation. And this, I think, is a wonderful example of the processing power of new technologies to transform sounds from a source to a figment, but a real figment of the composer's imagination. Okay, what you just heard now is the beginnings of a wonderfully huge and amazing bell called the Peace Bell in Rovereto, Italy. I was commissioned by Ivano Ascari, a fantastic trumpeter, to do a new piece. And when I started speaking with him, and he's based in Rovereto, I wanted to find out some about his environment, things that mattered to him. And he told me about this bell. And it is the largest ringing bell in the world. And it was originally cast from cannons melted after World War I. And at various times it has had to be recast, but it is now, it's located on the top of a tall hill. It is rung every day in memory of those fallen in all wars. And I created a piece for him called For the Fallen, for amplified trumpet and electronics fashioned by processing the sounds of the bell. I've also been commissioned to do other versions of it for different instruments. I think there's now soprano sax, clarinet, flute, cello. And it's been, again, a timbral voyage, because for the pieces where I am able to imagine doing different versions, I have to think about the timbral world of those instruments. So the next sound is one of the many transformations of the bell that I created in working on this piece. That's the original bell. So you can see that that gives you a sense, it's a bit of a paler, ghost-like sound that I wanted to use from that one. I don't see the tenor sax recording there, so I'm going to skip on to excerpts from a couple of very different types of electroacoustic pieces. One of the things that I have become particularly fascinated by in recent times is the world of nature around us. And I'm going to share with you a recording of the first movement of a piece called For the Birds. We are in a period where the decline in bird population is absolutely stunning and terrible. And one of the things I want to do, or wanted to do in this piece, was to draw our attention to the beauty of the bird song. And in particular here, because the commissioner, Madeline Shapiro, was a big fan of the Yellowstone region and hikes there frequently, I decided to restrict myself to the birds of that area. Of course, there are thousands upon thousands, and I needed to figure out how I was going to organize them and make choices. So I decided to create 4 movements, each of which is devoted to a different type of bird. The first movement is songbirds. The second is sapsuckers, that is the woodpecker type birds. The third movement is birds of prey, and the fourth movement is water birds. And I'm going to share with you now the first movement, songbirds.
So I was driving in my car listening to NPR, and I heard a piece about a factory in China. And what struck me was I was listening to boxes being wrapped, and I was listening to the sound of tape. And I thought, wow, that's actually really fascinating. So I took all kinds of different tape, tape on a dispenser for wrapping packages, duct tape, electric tape, whatever tape I could get my hands on, and went into a recording studio and recorded tape. And the first thing I did was to do a surround sound piece created from those different timbres. And I found them so intriguing that I didn't process them all that much, but I did do a lot of transformation using the sounds in varied rhythms and different ways. And then I thought, wow, it would be really interesting to do a piece that combined this stereo sound with the sounds of live performers. So I did a piece for any number of performers, each of whom has to have a small box with a gash in it, like a shoebox or whatever, a blunt object like a pencil or a chopstick or something,
and a roll of tape on a dispenser with teeth. And I premiered it with a group of children from a school in Richmond at the Third Practice Festival. And it also had the added advantage of the fact that you don't have to know music, and these kids didn't, in order to perform it. Instead, I developed a series of actions to do with the tape, and I had placards which I would hold up, and through that sequence, the music would take shape. And I thought it was really wonderful because the kids learned how to collaborate. They learned about timbre, they learned about dynamics, they learned how to work with a conductor, and it was a really joyous kind of interaction. And I later also did the same with a group of children from the Boys and Girls Club here in Charlottesville. And the small excerpt I'm going to play is from a performance at UVA of the New Music Ensemble led by Yi Jen Fang. It's very short, but just to give you an idea of a completely different kind of sonic inspiration. So this is from tape music. So just a short snippet to give you an idea of the sonic elements lurking in so many materials of our daily lives that we don't necessarily pay attention to on a daily basis. Now, given what time it is, I'm going to skip the next piece, which is called Penelope's Song. And if you're curious, that's available on YouTube and in various recordings online. And move directly to an excerpt of the ending of a piece called Ice Becomes Water, which I happily attended with the River Oaks Chamber Orchestra in Houston a couple of years ago. Was conducted by Mayan Chen, and they are such a wonderful organization, and I'm sure many of you have heard them. They do all kinds of different programs. And this piece is scored for string orchestra and electronics that I made by processing field recordings that were shared by a glaciologist who studies the acoustic signatures of glaciers. A lot can be told about their melting and their general motion by doing these types of recordings. So again, this is Ice Becomes Water, which unfortunately captures all too well what's happening to so many glaciers now worldwide. I'm going to actually, given the time, move on to close with Gayle Martin's performance of the Auroral Light from one of the many pieces I've composed for her. This one is from a set called To Keep the Dark Away, which was commissioned by Ellen Waldo. And Gayle, Ellen, and I are all great fans of Emily Dickinson's poetry. And this group involves very different kinds of moods. And the one that Gayle will be performing, called the Auroral Light, I hope will speak for itself. It is on her beautiful CD, which she so kindly named for my piece, called To Keep the Dark Away, which has both transcriptions of a variety of works from opera, as well as the transcription of my piano concerto called Fantasy on Saint Cecilia and To Keep the Dark Away. Thank you so much, Gayle.
Thank you.
So I wanted to leave a bit of time for questions, if anyone has any that they would like to ask.
Yes, go ahead, and thanks so much for a fantastic presentation. Gorgeous playing from Gayle. You are now allowed to unmute yourself. I just ask, after you ask a question, to go ahead and remute to make things a little bit quieter. Yes, Carol?
We've heard of people having writer's block. Do you ever get composer's block?
I get more composer's anguish, which means that I can spend inordinate amounts of time trying to get things right. And unfortunately, I have no algorithm for figuring out how to do that, so I can shortcut it. But no, I really find that the more I work on pieces, the more ideas flow. But I do a tremendous amount of revision. So in fact, a good example is a piece I'm composing right now. It's called Watershed, and it was commissioned by Michigan Technological University in collaboration with the Great Lakes Research Institute. And I set a huge challenge for myself. I'm scoring it for soprano sax, trumpet, trombone, violin, viola, cello, percussion, and electronics made from the fauna and the sounds of the Great Lakes. So it involved a huge amount of research. And I've worked with a variety of naturalists, and I want to single out the Macaulay Natural Sound Library at Cornell University, which is just amazing. And I'm focusing mainly on endangered animals. Of course, at the rate that things are going, they all will be. But it's been really challenging to find ways to have the instruments feel in conversation with the world of the animals and the world of the Great Lakes, and to figure out how to create an environment for both that on the one hand leaves room for the animals to sound and the lake to sound, and the other to think through in music how to convey something of the dance that's both positive and negative. We are, as a species, doing so much that's destructive of habitat, but of course, many people are really working to save it as well. But just the, figuring out how to manage the recorded world of these very diverse animals and the world of these very diverse instruments. So it's been challenging and fascinating at the same time. And I guess that in a way, for me, music does keep the dark away. And so, although I said anguish, it is in a way, but it's a kind of spiritual mind anguish at times, at others, great joy for finally somehow feeling like if I haven't gotten it right, whatever that is, it's as close as I can come.
Any other questions or comments? So thanks so much, Judith, for being here. I think next on our agenda is Roy Wylie's piece, and I believe I've got your picture open, Roy, if you'd like me to open that, and if you want to introduce the piece, I appreciate it. We have a fantastic, I listened to it yesterday, absolutely fantastic rendition of Rhapsody in Blue.
This concert was a culmination of a concert tour that I made with the Auburn University Wind Ensemble. Like the year before I left there to come here, was of Alabama schools and universities. And then we gave a final performance back at Auburn. This might seem strange to you that it's a for wind ensemble. We normally hear this piece with orchestra and piano or piano solo, but the original version was written for Paul Whiteman's concert, which he gave in 1924, called An Experiment in Modern Music, and was for a jazz band. Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, was a jazz band. And George Gershwin was asked to compose this, quote, concerto for that. So instead of hearing strings that we normally hear lots of, we'll hear lots of saxophones and those other kinds of wind instruments playing those parts. This is not the original version. It's an orchestration for wind ensemble from that original version, but the flavor of the sound is the same, I think. I think everyone probably knows this piece quite well. It's in any of its versions, so I don't have to introduce that. It was sort of, as you notice, the title of this concert, An Experiment in Modern Music, says nothing about popular music or classical music or anything like that. It was just modern music. And so Gershwin wrote this piece, including a lot of jazz elements in it, within a classical concerto kind of form. And that sort of set the stage for the accepting of jazz as a idiom that was valid for classical music. And so it became to be used more by composers later on. So with that being said, I'm sorry this is not a video, it's just an audio recording. And so I ask Debbie to put up the flyer for the original concert. If I don't know if she can while we're listening to it or not, but here we go. Rhapsody in Blue with piano and wind ensemble. Hope you enjoy it.
How are you? You forget? Holy girl.
That was fabulous, Roy. Maybe my new favorite, Rhapsody in Blue. We've played a lot of them in the symphony, and I just love the ease all the way up to the loud parts. It never gets bombastic, and the beautiful shaping musicality.
Thank you.